Companies of all sizes are striving to make driverless cars a reality on our roads. I spoke with KPMG's US automotive analyst, Gary Silberg, about the skepticism and the possibilities of the technology.
People can be skeptical in the beginning, but as they learn more and the opportunities with self-driving cars, they warm up quite nicely, actually. And in fact, I have a strong feeling, in fact, from the research we've done, is that people not only want self-driving cars, they'll actually pay for them. But they're not here yet, so we'll have to wait and see. But that's our initial research.
You know, that's the research that you have at the moment. But how close are we to the reality of having self-driving cars on the road?
If you think about the original equipment manufacturers, they've said by the end of the decade, and a lot of them are working on it. My bet is before the end of the decade for sure, you'll see some of those. And you have these little startup companies like, jokingly say this, Google, right, who has already developed one that has, I think, 700,000 miles on it. They've got prototypes going on, building them in Michigan right now. I'm aware of startup companies entering this space. The automotive ecosystem for self-driving cars is literally exploding. And when you have the machination of so many new technologies and so many new players, and I mean brilliant players that want to change the world, I'm an eternal optimist, keep that in mind, but I think it's going to be here much faster than most people think. And certainly by the end of the decade, you'll see them, and by mid-decade, 2025, they'll be quite prevalent, actually.
Now, let's talk about some of the costs. In terms of the infrastructure that you need to have in place, or even the cost of these vehicles as compared to a regular vehicle, what sort of expectations should consumers have?
Well, there's always that disconnect between I want it and I'll pay for it. I always jokingly say that with my children. They're always willing to want a lot of things, but as long as Dad pays for it. So will the market be able to price it properly and people pay for it is, ultimately the question.
Is there a social issue? Are people actually ready to accept that lack of control?
That's a great question. So I never think of these as black or white or 100% yes or 100% no. I think from our research, the vast majority of people would be willing to for most of the time. But I think a lot of people, in fact, in our research, when people were skeptical, you ask them, well, why don't you like this? And a lot of people are car enthusiasts. I want to drive. I love that beautiful fall afternoon and, the mosaic view, and I want to be driving with my convertible down. So you have the car enthusiasts. You have cynical people, too, that, by the way, they don't ever want to give up control, and I think you'll have that group. But the vast majority of people, for most situations, I don't think they enjoy driving. You're sitting in traffic, going back and forth, you're wasting time, you got to concentrate, you're late at night, you're tired. So for most situations, I think people would be willing to give it up as long as they can prove the technology works. People are going to have to figure out that the car is going to be something new in the future. It's going to be a personalization. It's going to change in terms of technology. And you and your relationship, I know this may sound a little bizarre, but the relationship between you and your car is going to be different. It's going to be smart. It's going to know who you are. It's going to be able to recognize you. It's going to know your habits. It's going to make your life better. And in addition to that, it's going to probably drive you most of the time too.
As with any new technology, there are going to be bumps in the road, so to speak. Now, what are some of the biggest challenges or some of the controversies surrounding having self-driving cars on the road, whether it's insurance or perhaps not having the right infrastructure in place? What sort of challenges are you seeing?
Well, first of all, the cars have to communicate, I think, with each other. So you have vehicle-to-vehicle communication, because the current technology can't necessarily see around buildings and know everything perfectly. So I think there'll be some vehicle-to-vehicle communication that should be available, and also vehicle-to-infrastructure communication to really make it better. Although that model doesn't necessarily have to be the model. There's some people who say you can just have self-driving cars by themselves. But I think that would be the fusion, if you will, of those technologies coming together will make it more safe. There will be situations where the car is going to have to make a decision in a nanosecond, and it could have, implications on people's lives.
In terms of the possibilities for this technology and the companies that could be really reshaping the industry when it comes to self-driving cars, who do you think are going to be the front runners?
Well, that's a terrific question. So I think the ecosystem is going to fundamentally change. Let me explain what I mean by that. And I think it's going to be all about innovation, new ideas, and new companies. The old school was you kind of had a hierarchy of the automotive ecosystem where you had the king sitting at the top and said, thou shalt make me a steering, and three tier one suppliers would bid it, and a tier two and a tier three. I think that's an old way of thinking. Our view is the future, and where the big players and the big ideas will come from will be through startup companies. And we've talked to, in our newest white paper we're going to release in a couple months, massive amounts of technologies being started by these little 10, 15 companies that are using amazing background in physics and engineering to create sensor technology, eyes, that can see, software technology, voice recognition technology, massive amounts of innovation.